Well, welcome all back to our sort of monthly webinar series for our adaptation working group and sort of our social ecological system working group as well. I was really pleased with the showing at the Open Science Conference, and part of that was, sort of impetus to sort of get this going again now that the summer season's over with, and trying to collect people's thoughts and kind of go forward with their activities within our region. And Jill Lackett is going to be is sort of taking over some of the organization of and arrangements for the webinar, and she'll talk about that in a few slides. And also kind of recap what we did and what we found during the Open Science Conference. So looking forward for your input and further interactions on this. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jill to sort of go through the introduction and stuff.
All right, thanks, Dennis. All right, welcome everybody who's on the call and on the WebEx. So yeah, as Dennis mentioned, today I'll be sort of introducing our plan for reviving these monthly webinars, and then giving a recap of some aspects of the Open Science Conference that might be of particular interest to this group for those of you who weren't there at the conference in May. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So first off, the next few slots for the webinars are filled in October. Bill Travis from CU Boulder will be talking about quantitative risk and decision analysis applied to adaptation choices. And in November, Corey Knapp from Western State and Shannon McNeely from here at CSU will be talking about their BLM Colorado project. I do have a tentative speaker for December already. I just not announcing it till I get the final confirmation on that. All of these are the second Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. So for the conference, we had about 120 attendees at the conference, representing a wide variety of disciplines. Scientists, land managers, and tribal professionals were all in attendance. We also had a 2-day training for students and early career scientists and managers on the 2 days previous to the conference. We had about 20 to 25 attendees at the training, and the training was a sort of introduction to the foundational science areas of the center, as well as an introduction to some of the tools that are used here at the center. And so the next thing I did was I reviewed all of the abstracts for the conference and picked out all the ones that discussed any social science work to sort of collect a snapshot of social ecological system work underway in the region that was presented at the conference. The research was pretty varied and multifaceted and broad-ranging. So I'm just going to go through some examples of the types of work that were presented at the conference related to social science. And these are both from oral and poster presentations. Okay. First was water governance, assessing the adaptive capacity to climate-induced disturbances, the development and use of narrative climate scenarios, and following from that, responses to climate scenarios, or how managers interpret climate information, assessing needs to deliver management relevant climate science, understanding climate sensitivities and needs of decision makers and managers, developing usable climate science tools for managers, making climate research useful for decision makers, so both useful and usable, climate change and impacts of invasives on indigenous culture, development of decision support tools to deal with drought, as well as development of decision support tools for water managers. Community-led adaptation, specifically renewable energy in tribal communities. LCC landscapes by design. They were looking at integrating climate change information into the co-management of conservation priorities. Learning about stakeholder needs and enhancing adaptive capacity. This was sort of lessons learned from the Western Water Assessment. Multi-sectoral adaptation planning, including wildlife, watersheds, and livelihoods. Human and natural systems research in U.S. emergency management frameworks. Development of regional climate scenarios and scenario planning workshops. Interdisciplinary drought risk research. And engaging stakeholders to assess capacity for increased water storage, and some aspects of sustainable farming, including the economics of farm business planning and adaptation ecology. So that's just from the abstract, sort of a sampling of some of the social ecological system research that's going on in the region, at least from what was presented at the conference. On the last day of the conference, we had breakout group discussions to try to tease out what were some of the outstanding science needs that our stakeholders would like our researchers to pursue further. The breakout groups were divided by ecoregions. We had Rocky Mountains and high elevation, Great Plains terrestrial, and wetland, streams, and riparian areas. And so each group was asked to brainstorm a list of unanswered science needs from their perspective. These lists of science needs were then compiled and sent out to all of the NCCSC foundational science leads and funded PIs to catalog which research groups are working on which needs. And they could either choose they're working on a need as a primary focus or indirectly. The purpose of this was to see if we are meeting the needs of our stakeholders with our research projects and to see if there are gaps in our research questions that stakeholders would like us to investigate. Interestingly, all of the science needs from all three groups are being addressed either directly or indirectly by at least one funded project. If anyone is interested in seeing the actual results from the survey, just let me know and I can share that with you. So now I'll go over the list of needs from each group, just to give you a flavor of what the groups came up with as far as outstanding research questions. So from the Rocky Mountain High Elevation group, they're interested in interacting stressors and the metrics to measure them, temporal and spatial scale issues, future achievable conditions for a changing system, effective communication between the government, scientists, and the public, quantifying range of outcomes, ecological responses to climate stressors, incorporating nonlinear dynamics into climate change research, single species versus holistic management approaches, impacts of climate change on mountain communities with small populations, improving climate models at regional scales, public perspectives of climate change, tools and resources for climate monitoring, and mountain effect and water use for agriculture, as well as to quantify the effects of local populations on climate processes. Next group, reference conditions for ecological processes. The Great Plains terrestrial group talked about adaptation options that are robust and practical, ecological and social tipping points, effects of climate change on convective precipitation, change in water budget due to climate change, scale issues related to agricultural decision-making and climate model data, the effect of climate change on snowpack formation and runoff, effect of climate change on agricultural economic systems, 3, 5, 10, 20-year projections of climate, effect of climate change on aquifer recharge, possibilities for network distributed agricultural systems, communicating climate model results from different models, climate change effects on disease vectors, livestock and wildlife populations, baseline physiological environmental thresholds of key species affected by climate change, change in natural habitat structure, how to choose models, the best models for management purposes, and the benefits and drawbacks of diverting urban organic waste to agricultural use. And from the last group, the wetland, streams, and riparian areas, outstanding research questions and topics there include climate change impacts on local and regional hydrology, incentives for actors engaging with climate change, quantification of natural water storage, barriers to data sharing and data gathering across jurisdictions, water use scenario planning addressing different end uses, transition from carbon-based economic systems, economic considerations of sustainable agricultural practices, evapotranspiration effects on water balance, climate change effect on groundwater movement and aquifer recharge, scaling up local interventions, models for examining social ecological systems and how to improve them, scale issues related to vegetation responses to riparian areas, climate projections for microclimatic zones, and understanding and exploring unidentified thresholds. So like I said, from the survey we sent out after the conference, we have at least one group, either as a primary focus or indirectly working on all of these questions, which was interesting. But once again, if you'd like to see the actual numbers on that, let me know. I can share it with you. And next, Dennis and I have been talking about having a workshop in the spring, a face-to-face workshop in the spring. This is blank because there are no plans for it at the moment, but we wanted to introduce the idea here today. Dennis, anything more on that?
Yeah, so part of the idea is trying to get the broad community together again, looking at adaptation research, looking at it from a social ecological system perspective, and trying to look, based on some of the things that we've seen from the Open Science Conference, some of the findings from our funded research and from our foundational science area work that Shannon's been leading. How do we actually look at what are some of the researchable questions that would identify gaps, or are there opportunities that we're missing in a way that we are needing to better engage with our stakeholders or decision makers. So the thinking is to have the community at large with some of the resource managers and entities that we've been working with, and some of the researchers in the funded activities to sort of meet together to identify some synthesis products, kind of taking some lessons learned, as well as then looking at how do we map future research efforts that the Climate Science Center can support, or if there's enough tangible material that we can put into a synthesis proposal workshop sort of working group that we might identify something for SUSINC or for the Powell Center, depending on the type of framing that we would come up with. So it would be probably a 2-day workshop oriented toward looking at how far have we come, what have we found, and then looking forward. A couple other things that I guess are coming forward that just want to provide a heads up on. There's a early career workshop that I'm involved with prior to AGU in San Francisco on Friday and Saturday. We'll be holding this in conjunction with the IGBP research community and their early career scientists from international community, as well as a group with Future Earth. But I think a lot of the discussions that we had at the early career training that we had in front of our Open Science Conference, there seemed a few people there that might benefit and contribute to that early career workshop. So if you know of someone who would like to apply, just send them forward their information to me. I'll contact them and see if they're interested in this co-design, co-production workshop. The other thing that we're also involved with that might be of interest to some of us here, there's a proposed IPCC Working Group 2 workshop probably in the fall of 2016. I'm looking at lessons learned from AR5, looking at impacts and vulnerability and resilience components. So nominees for that will I'll probably be involved with that. And so even though it's an international effort, I think our group here in the North Central can contribute quite a bit, because I think the type of research that we're doing would be quite germane to the type of AR5 type activities, especially since we've gone through some of the national climate assessment and some of the state level, regional level vulnerability work. So those are some of the things that are in the mix, and some of the things that we would like to sort of, as we have these webinars, try to share with each other so that we kind of share these communications and look forward to how we can leverage these things into sort of activities that we can do more effectively within our region. So I guess in that vein, unless Jill has something more to add, if there's other comments for Jill or in general, I think maybe we can open it up at this point for sort of your comments and input at this point.
Yes, that's good.
Well, if there's none, I've got a wild, crazy idea for you guys to consider. One of the other things that I've been involved with through some UN interactions is looking at what do the Sustainable Development Goals mean. In my discussions recently with GCRP back in DC, and people in the folks in the State Department, folks at AID, there seems to be a lack of information known about what Sustainable Development Goals are. What is it? What is the UN and the United States actually going to sign on to in New York City in about 2 weeks? So it'd be interesting to think about, sort of a side meeting or a conversation about at a regional level, if we look at the 17 SDG goals, could we articulate scenarios of looking at implementation of those? And the 17 goals include things like no poverty, no food shortage, reductions of emissions of greenhouse gases by some percent, looking at healthy cities, looking at preservation of natural capital, natural assets, those sorts of things. Looking at gender issues. So it's a very broad social, ecological agenda that is being put forward. But it's something that, as we look at resource management and development within our region, given the strong energy profile that we have, the type of food production that we have, water shortages, growth in population, how we would, work with our stakeholders, work with sort of civil society within our region to actually say, are there things that we can do better? Are there things that you're doing now that can be enhanced or lessons learned? And to me, it's an interesting opportunity that actually might lead the way of how the United States is looking at its own reporting on and evaluation of SDGs. And so that's just sort of something that emerging from recent discussions with folks working in the UN. I guess we're just, it's all dead silence here.
What can you, does everybody actually actively
So I guess, Dennis, this is Rudy. And so what, and because as we're answering emails and listening at the same time, I'm sorry, I admit that completely. What's the product or the outcome that you're shooting for?
Of which process? This latter one?
Yes.
I guess ultimately is looking at, are we able to define sort of a development scenario for our region that would accommodate this, meeting the 17 goals in a reasonable way, so that we can enhance our sort of what is being called transformation to sustainability more effectively, in looking at in the timeline of the UN. It's a post-2015 agenda that mapped out to 2030. There's another effort, sort of a global to regional effort being done in the region of this context is multinational region, is looking at what's the world like in 2050 if we meet these goals, and what are the pathways to them that are regionally, contextually defined or nuanced. And for me then, for what we would do in the North Central would be to look at, what are the type of livelihood strategies, what are the resource conservation strategies, what are the natural resource strategies to actually accommodate these multiple goals more or less simultaneously, understanding there's trade-offs in these things, but it's a lens, it's like a bug's eye lens of 17 facets looking at the world and its development. And it seems to me that by looking through these sort of bug eye lenses, you actually might find ways of more sustainably managing these limited resources as development pathways for economic growth continues.
So are you talking about writing or having some sort of array of adaptation options, or because you mentioned scenarios, so are we talking about looking at these 17 items and then thinking about, a circle on the map, the Colorado Front Range or whatever that circle may be, and then putting together a series of scenarios that represent potential futures or targeted futures or strategies to achieve the preferred future?
It'd be more like coming up with a series of visioning workshops and looking at, sort of what are the research to actually, evaluate the feasibility of these various visions. So it'd be, I guess, a combination of synthesis and some foresighting techniques, and then incorporating scenarios as different pathways of looking at the different trade-offs along these 17 goals.
So Dennis, this is Linda. I think that's an interesting idea. I would, and I like the visioning aspect rather than sort of, let's see. I'd like to tension the visioning aspect with whether it can be accomplished. And so one question I think is, for example, eliminating poverty. Homelessness is a big thing in Fort Collins right now, and the issue, and how we try to address that. But it strikes me that eliminating poverty is a challenge given what we can do at, our regional scale, and then how the world affects our region, both economically and environmentally. And there's only, and it's a challenge to try and address that within the region, given what might happen globally. So those are the kinds of things I think that would be interesting for the region to take a look at, is what can we do given great uncertainty in how the world is affecting us. And what I'm thinking about here is the climate projections imply sort of a future, this shared sustainable projections and what the integrated models have done. But those scenarios are not very helpful, I think, for people trying to vision the future under environmental change as well as many other factors of change. And so I think what you're talking about could possibly make real some of the challenges that we see in front of us and identify the research needs as well as what the implementation needs might be as also.
Because I think I really appreciate those comments, Linda, because I think as we look at the national strategy, there's going to be a need for much more granularity in looking at the decision structure and pathways that various communities can take. And so I think if we can try to help articulate that within our regional aspects, it would be a useful exercise in looking at the future. Anyway, it's a brainstorming type idea, and I think it's something that I still haven't gotten my head around the specifics of it yet either. So I'm just, like I said, it's just a harebrained idea just I threw out there just to kind of maybe kick around some emails and get some groups together around a beer or a virtual beer and see how far we can take it.
That sounds like a good idea. This is Rudy. It's a very interesting concept, and yeah, one worth talking about.
Okay.
Hey, Dennis, this is Bill Travis. What do you think about the process for the shared socioeconomic pathways, that's going on in service to the RCPs for IPCC? They meant to have regional granularity eventually, right?
Yes, they are. In fact, I think there's an Aspen Global Change Institute in October that's going to be looking at that. Gossam and what the hell's his name? Richard Moss.
Yeah.
Have organized a workshop that sort of focused on that integrated assessment and the regional aspects. How do you improve the granularity? And it's a big research, as you well know. It's a major research initiative right now.
Yeah, and the reason I mention it, I think maybe Linda was at one of those meetings, and when they first started developing the SSP approach, there was a lot of scenario ideas of how you could at least start with a matrix and fill in scenarios for a region or a nation state. And it wasn't as much linked to the needs of integrated modeling yet back then. And if we look back at those, we could develop something like that for the Front Range, answering the sets of questions that they raised, staying short of trying to fill out enough, fill out an integrated model.
Yeah, because I think they need to have those type of outcomes and questions in front of them, and it'd be useful to actually look at from our region. And then there's a workshop that Joe Imtiaz and Imtiaz put together on looking at the regional fit of the climate fields for impact in it, and I would think adaptation would be part of it. Jeff is going to it. Unfortunately, I can't go, but some of the findings from that workshop would be helpful in looking at how do we incorporate some of the global scale analyses down to, regions as small as ours, because, in a sense, we're about 2 grid cells for some of these large-scale analyses, and some of the process representations are very ill-suited to the type of level of questions that we have at our scale.
But I know that they were looking to have an impact person, ecological impacts representatives or representatives at that. I don't know if anybody from the adaptation team or Bill will be in Boulder on September 24th and 25th.
Yeah, well, and great. And I could send around 2 of the early SSP workshops were at Boulder, and maybe someone else on the call was there. And there was a white paper that came out that focused on the narrative scenarios and then moving towards the quantitative scenarios. And there's a website that archives the SSPs, and I think it's an EASA website. So they're worth looking at.
Okay.
And
yeah, that'd be great to share those.
Yeah, I'll send them to I'll send them to you, Dennis.
Okay.
I know you've seen them, but now how to get at the scenario framework paper, because it strikes me that what you were talking about, we would be thinking at that stage, the scenario framework of how the region develops or doesn't develop, and how it creates more or less greenhouse gas, more or less sensitivity, more or less vulnerability, including, for instance, as Linda mentioned, who are the vulnerable populations in our region. Okay, thanks.
Bill or Dennis, the workshop that Richard Moss is part of, how is region defined in that? Is it countries?
Well, for the shared socioeconomic pathways, since they were designing them toward replacing ESRES and the RC, and then developing the representative concentration pathways, they certainly knew down the line that they would have to have the nation states called out. And, that became somewhat controversial at the COP meeting, I guess, in Peru. But the graphics, the scenario process, I'm looking at it right now, doesn't define it for you. You can do it yourself.
But the IAMs that tried to develop, what the land use, economic development, population growth would be to track the RCPs, they had to put some of that information in there, and their information, if I understand it correctly, is multi-country.
Well, and but Moss's group, the first one that I saw results from was their Midwestern one. It was heavy on agriculture, but it had all the other socioeconomic elements in it. And what was that? Maybe like 10 states or so.
Right.
And I think if you go to their website at the University of Maryland, that one's still described. But yeah, it's a great question. And you certainly, when we work, we all want to be ready to engage at the national and international level, but someone's got to. It'd be great to solidify what a region, what a sub-region looks like, or whatever word you want to use.
Mm-hmm. So the reason I'm interested in that is we just had our meeting associated with this assessment the Forest Service does every 10 years called the RPA assessment, Resource Planning Act, and we are grappling with what kinds of economic and land use scenarios to use if we use the RCPs as the climate scenarios.
Yes.
So it's a...
Yeah, interesting, because, of course, ESRAS and its replacement feeds into the RCPs, but now you want to, if you're using those as your important impact assessment tool or lead, then what do you want to do in terms of what will it impact in my region? And what will the region look like when those things, as we work our way through them? I get the question, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, sort of been looking at in framing some research questions is looking at sort of a multi-scaled approach of how do you sort of embed these different scales of issues and questions that are then consistent at these multiple scales, but provide the type of granularity needed to make some of these decisions, either for national policy or for regional water management, drought response or irrigation consumption demands, power demands. And so, is there a way of providing that's internally consistent methodology that scales down to the need of the decision maker?
Well, and the great frustration in that, in the integrated assessment, it struck me, was that if you had a scenario in which your region was being affected by climate change, you also had a scenario in which your region was taking part in mitigation at the same time, meaning IPCC-like mitigation. And how did that change your region? And or, so did you have agriculture that was changing in order to reduce its greenhouse footprint?
So
yeah.
And to me, then some of that, can be laid out with storylines, and then try and find, sort of down the road, an analytical approach to actually quantify these various process and state changes in your system, and seeing, how do you minimize the bad outcomes?
Well, and that's a good point, and they stress the different scenarios so that you don't get caught in a chicken or egg infinite do loop on things like greenhouse gases, I think.
Well, let's keep this, I guess, conversation going over email. We'll look at the material that you send out, Bill, and as these various workshops emerge, we'll keep people informed. So if someone goes to them, we can get some initial feedback, and we can sort of think about how we might do this as a large team effort for our region, as well as looking at some other studies that are going on. So this might be a topic or a separate workshop that we might do outside of the synthesis workshop. We have funds for a number of sort of small working groups getting together over the next 18 months to kind of, given that there's an outcome in the project identified that would benefit the region, that we can support. So put your thinking caps on and write a little mini proposal, and we'll take a look at it.
And also, I am filling the spring slots now as well, so if anyone wants to take one of those spots to talk about their research with the group, let me know and we'll get it scheduled.
Anything more out there anyone want to share? Anything to add on the DOI drought initiative? Anything emerging there?
Just one thing to note was that the Science for Nature and People, which is a SNAP workshop that NC's it kind of has evolved into in Santa Barbara. There is an eco-drought initiative in the North Central. We are looking to kind of more listen to the results of that SNAP working group to do some guidance. They did have to do some quick turnaround things in the Southwest and South Central. They funded some work in the Rio Grande, and I think out in just kind of I forget exactly what watershed in California, but kind of because of the drought and wanting to get something quick turnaround, they went forward with some of the stuff, but we, in those regions, whereas we kind of were able to table some of the $15 to 2016, and the strategy was if we could then delay a little bit, wait till the SNAP working group comes up. So an update on that is I think they're hiring 2 people, 2 postdocs through the SNAP working group. I believe they're interviewing people this week, and that's going to be through Wildlife Conservation Society. Molly Cross is the PI on that SNAP working group, and these 2 postdocs will be working mostly with Molly, but then sort of depending on their regional interest and what they're doing, they'll be working with various CSCs, and there is certainly a human dimensions or an adaptation component to the work Molly's putting together. So I guess, by next month we should know who they're hiring and kind of when that start date is and when those SNAP workshops will be, so we can probably give a little bit more on that.
Okay.
Where are they actually going to be housed?
That is, one will be in Santa Barbara, one is up to sort of they'll see where the application comes in. And so there's a chance, and I talked to Molly at the Open Science Conference, and if a strong candidate says, I'll take the job, but I got to work in Fort Collins, they could sit here, if that worked out best with what they were thinking of doing. So there's that possibility that the person will be in our region, either in Bozeman or maybe Fort Collins. But again, that sort of depends on who they interview, and they could set them both at NCs if 2 strong candidates come from Santa Barbara. And so it's up in the air, but there's a possibility.
And Rudy and Nina, can you refresh my memory when, I think, is it Amber?
Yes, this is Rudy. Amber's going to be coming, the start date is October 19th, is the first day she'll be in the office with us. So we're actually very excited about that. Okay.
So we might just have her introduce herself to the working group seminar, just for, give a sort of 5-minute introduction when she's on board. Probably.
And maybe a longer one too.
Okay. And at the November.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Great. And her name is Rudy. What? It's not Amber. It's I'm not pulling.
Amanda.
Amanda
Craven.
But I couldn't pull that either.
Sorry, I was just on a different call talking to someone named Amber.
Yeah.
And there's a Stella. Sorry, there's just a lot of new hires coming in. So yes, Amanda Cravens.
That's it. Thanks. I couldn't remember either.
Anything else? Someone? If not, I guess we can give this a call of the day. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Spread the word. Let them know we're back online.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.